Hi, welcome back to Parenting in the Trenches. In our adoption series, we are today focusing in on attachment healing in the face of attachment trauma. Dr. Lark Eshleman is an author, a therapist, an educator whose expertise is working with kids and teens who have experienced early emotional trauma, attachment difficulties, neglect, and abuse. She is board certified in domestic violence by the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, and she is the creator of STAT, Synergistic Trauma and Attachment Therapy. Dr. Lark's experiences as a volunteer field worker with Croatian orphans following the Balkan Wars for Independence, as a school principal, a psychologist, librarian, parent, and during her own childhood have all shaped her pioneering work with families, with teachers, therapists, and institutions. She helps them with the necessary understanding and the tools to support young people in their recovery from traumatic experiences. Lark, I am so incredibly pleased that we have had a chance to meet. What an opportunity to have this conversation together, and that you are willing to spend some time with us talking about adoption, the ways in which separation and the disruption of our attachment from birth parents disrupts our development, and how adoptive parents can be really effective agents of healing for their children. Thanks for being here today.
This is my joy, Karen, not even my pleasure, but really my joy. I think from our short conversations before, how enthusiastic I am about talking about this, about sharing information with people, about learning from people. And already I've learned from you. Thank you for the podcasting you're doing. It's awesome.
So good. Okay. We've got a lot to cover today on
We
the
do.
topic of attachment disruption and attachment healing, trauma healing.
Yep.
And the breadth and depth of your work is so incredible that I know we cannot cover everything you have done and learned in this time together. So I thought maybe we would just kick off with a question about what inspired you to write the book? You wrote a book called Becoming a Family, Promoting Healthy Attachments with Your Adopted Child. And I'm very intrigued. That's a big project to take on. What inspired you to do that?
It was a big project, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. It was one of those things that I was bursting to do. So again, the word joy comes to mind when I think of my career. I'm so fortunate. So what was happening at the time was I had started a clinic, and we were sort of experimenting, is maybe a non-clinical word and maybe a dangerous word, I don't know, but we knew that there were ways to work with families and kids that were not being used on a regular basis, and that we should be using them. New forms of interventions, new ways of approaching healing. Parents were coming in to a great extent through foster care and adoption, and they were saying to us, it's not working, or it's not working as well as we hoped, or we're afraid, we're devastated. We came to this place in our lives with hope and love, and it's just not looking the way we thought it would.
Yes.
And we don't know what to do.
Yep.
So I would go home at night filled with sadness about people whose lives were not working the way they were expecting them to, especially when their goals and dreams were so beautiful. What they wanted was healthy children, a healthy family. So my goal in this book was to inspire hope. Really, the word that I kept reminding myself, I didn't need to remind myself, it just kept coming up in my brain, was these are people filled with hope. And now that hope has been, I don't want to say damaged so much as it's in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And we need to reinvest hope. So that's kind of where it came from. Here's an example of what was happening at the time that made me think, okay, I'm learning from parents. I'm learning from kids. I need to share this because people need to hear from each other about what they are doing that's working and what they're doing that didn't work. And, all the good stuff we can learn from each other. So a family came in, lovely couple, a little older. They waited a while before they started their family. They went to a foreign country. I won't give any identifying information,
Mhm.
but they brought home two children from another country. And on the way home, they didn't go directly to their home. They stopped at Disney World on the way because they said these are kids who come from significant deprivation. It's just not fair that they never had a chance to experience the kind of things that our kids do, and we want to give them fun. We want their lives to be fun. Well, Karen, you and probably most
Yeah.
of your
I'm
listeners
cringing already. Yeah.
will know what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time they came to us, it was sort of they're holding their heads, thinking, "Oh my gosh, we just don't understand this behavior." The
Yeah.
kids, I think, were 5 and 6,
Okay.
and they had had a couple experiences in therapy that were not real helpful.
Mm.
So they came as kind of a last resort. Well, when we talked about why the trip to Disney World kind of set them off in a not so great trajectory, they said, "Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
I
now we
know.
get it."
Oh, the realization, right? Yeah.
Yep, yeah.
Ah,
And that's what I was going for in the book was
okay.
nobody is at fault here. This is a no
No.
fault zone. We
So
didn't
great
know.
intentions, right? Like just
Mm,
such, yeah. Yeah.
yep,
Hmm.
exactly. So it's sort of like, all right, if I can help someone else by sharing experiences, of course, with everyone's permission, but
Yeah.
it's like, wow, we can help lots of families that
Hmm.
love these children that are coming into it with very positive expectations as well as mission,
Yeah.
and just help the process. So
Incredible.
hope, reinstating hope, reinvesting hope, and giving tools.
I'm
That was
so
the
glad you wrote
emphasis.
it. I'm so glad you wrote it. I would echo that has been my experience working with adoptive and foster families is
Yeah,
that is so common. It is so common. And
yeah,
I think it's more common than not that adoptive they are so hope-filled. They have deep hopes and plans for
oh
loving
yes,
family environments to envelop kids who have been starved of the connection that they deserve.
right.
And there's this longing to both receive and provide it. And when that feels difficult, surprisingly difficult, it just can crush people. Like,
It
I
is
don't
a
know now
crusher.
I'm lost. I don't know where to go now from here
Yeah,
because I had a plan in my head about how I was going to just love on this kid.
right.
And it's not working. And in fact, the more I love on them, the more I'm pushed away. And what do I do with that? Right. And
Yep.
if it's more common than not for those parents to underestimate the attachment injury, and I would say, I don't know if this is how you have experienced this, but I see this so much more in infant adoption that
Mm,
people believe that and I think that's fair because the research is pretty new for us to understand the science about what's happening for our kids neurodevelopmentally
yeah,
when there's an attachment disruption in utero, in birth, and like that
yeah,
trauma
yeah.
really early seems foreign to us as adults where we don't remember. So if they can't remember, they're not really traumatized. Can you speak to that? What do we know now about what happens for kids
Yeah, well,
in the
I
brain?
think it's fascinating that this whole field has been fascinating to me
Yeah,
since forever, really.
yeah,
Partly because of my own upbringing, partly because of what happened in my own family. But um, and I love them dearly, and they're wonderful people. But
yeah,
we all live what we learn,
yes.
and so what we learned in my family was different from what I would consider to be the most optimal,
Hmm.
healthy. And so I was fascinated by this. I wanted desperately to understand and to learn, and it pushed me throughout my career.
Oh,
And as I watched the brain research coming out and put it side by side with attachment theory and attachment therapy, and then my greatest teachers, parents and children themselves,
yeah.
all of this came together, and it was this aha moments one after another. And one of them is this: If you, let me see if I can make this a really easy thing to understand, because I think for some people it's not at all intuitive.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. But
Yeah.
if you learn the English language, then you can read a book. If you don't know the English language and someone gives you a book written in English, you can't read it. If when you're very young, you learn what an attachment is,
Yeah. The
what is
template.
a, exactly the
Okay.
template, what is it that says, when I'm afraid, this is where I go. When I have needs, this is how I express them. When I need help,
Mm.
I know that I can trust it will be there. Even if it's not the best
Yeah.
attachment, even if it's not the most healthy, once you learn the template, you can take it with you.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't get that when you're very young, infant adoption says you don't have time for a parent. Healthy attachment takes time.
Yeah.
If you don't have time to develop and learn what is attachment, then you don't have it to bring with you. It's like being given a book. When someone offers you a
Mhm.
healthy attachment, it's like being given a book, but you never learned the language.
Mm.
So I think people are surprised, and often parents will say to me, we really don't think it's an attachment problem because we adopted them right from the hospital,
Yeah. Common.
or
Yeah.
we adopted them very early, or they
Yeah.
came to us when they were still only a few months old. I understand why you would expect that that would be true,
Mhm.
but in fact, very often it's the opposite.
Mhm.
Then there's the whole issue of the toxins that many, many babies experience in
Yeah.
utero. And that's a whole
Yeah.
another neurodevelopmental issue.
That's
But
right.
in terms of learning attachment, usually it is best learned. Most often it is learned early, early, early. And if you don't learn it, you don't have the template for it, you're
Mm-hmm.
not bringing it into another relationship.
That's well said. We
Does that
talk.
make sense, Karen?
Yeah,
Because
it
it's much
does.
harder to learn later.
It is.
Yeah.
I always think about it as kind of like a map. If I like, I know I have a sense of where I want to go, what I want to experience, but without some kind of map to teach me how to get there, it just
Yeah.
feels like I'm stuck in the middle of a forest. I don't know which way is south, which way is west, and I'm confused, but still left with the longing. So I want something,
Yeah.
but I can't achieve it.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult when we aren't taught maps, and our
Yeah.
secure attachments teach us the maps. That is the map, right?
Yes. And what you're describing too is what I call the push pull of attachment disorder, in that I think every baby, every child knows there's something that they're not getting. Something
Yeah.
is wrong, something is missing, something
Yeah.
isn't going quite right. And so they're asking for help. So they
Yeah.
cry, they scream, they misbehave, they do something that is an attempt to secure
Draw it
that,
in.
whatever it is
Yeah.
that they're missing,
Right.
the attention, the affection, the stability,
Yeah.
whatever they are sensing that they need, but they can't articulate. But then, because attachment has been something that was scary in the past because it was broken, they were
Yeah.
left without it. It's misery. It's misery to
Yeah.
lose an attachment, and they lost it. So who the heck wants to go through that again? So they put their
Yeah.
hand up, their little hand,
Protection.
one little hand is going,
Yeah. Come
please
on
give me
in.
something, I know I'm missing it. And the other little hand is saying, but don't come too close because
Not
I don't want to have
safe.
another broken heart.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be broken again. So it's a push pull that happens over and over again. And I feel so sympathetic with parents who are
Yeah.
trying their very best to be consistent, to give what they think the child is asking for, but then to be pushed away.
Yes. It
Yeah,
hurts,
it hurts.
It
Everybody is hurting,
hurts. We are
right?
all wired for connection. And I
We
think
are wired for
sometimes
connection.
parents will get that around developing children. Like that's like the
Mhm.
first aha level of, oh, our babies are born wired for connection. That's why I can understand and attune to them. And but that requires our own connection with self too. We are
It
wired
does.
for connection. So when parents come and say, I'm struggling so much, I feel rejected by my child. I know I'm the adult and I'm supposed to be ever present and always okay with everything. But man, when I get slapped in the face, or if I get sworn at, or if I get bit, or if I'm pouring into them all day long and they're miserable at the end of it,
Yeah.
like nothing I do seems right.
Yeah.
That level of exhaustion is very real because we too are human, and that's not a healthy exchange in relationship. And so we suffer too from that experience.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it.
Yeah.
And I've heard so many parents say, and I believe it's true, that kids with attachment issues have a very strong innate sense of where the soft spots are.
Yes.
Where
Finely
can
attuned
they?
skills, the hot
Yeah,
buttons. Yeah.
it's a street smart
Yeah.
that kids develop. We're talking about kids who have fear of, well, their lives are fear driven. In
Right.
fact, Seaburn Fisher wrote a book called the Fear Driven Brain. I think that's the
Mm.
name of the book. Anyway,
Okay.
that's the name of the talk that she gives about it. And I believe that's most of our kids. Their brains are driven by fear.
Yeah.
So, if they're afraid, they're going to find whatever they can that's going to keep them safe. And that means they have to know other people's soft spots
Yeah.
so that they can zing,
Protect
push them away.
themselves.
And they're protecting themselves. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Karen, it brings up a point that I didn't know if we would have time to talk about, but I
Mm.
really think it's important to mention it.
Please do.
We're told as parents, um, especially those of you who are adoptive or foster parents or parents of children who have a lot of early trauma,
Mm.
that we have to be good attachment parents. And that means that we need to be the only parent, the only adult in that child's life. And to a great extent, I believe that's true. However, just as we're talking about infants who don't have the template and are too afraid to allow themselves to be vulnerable to try it with their parent,
Yeah.
there are numbers of kids who can try attachment and learn the template with another adult
Mm.
or sometimes with an animal, a dog, for example, a pet. But I'm thinking now of a grandparent maybe or a
Yeah.
neighbor, somebody who's not threatening because the child does not have to have
It's
what
not
anyone would
associated
consider to
with
be
parenthood.
yeah,
Okay.
right. And that they can very often practice with this child what it feels like to receive
Mm.
affection from, or even just living in a healthy, it's not the right word, a fear-free zone.
Yeah.
They don't
Where
have
they
to be
can be
afraid with this
regulated
person.
in that
Yeah.
context. Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I encourage parents to think about that for their own child. There may be a person. Now, obviously, you have to be really, really, really careful because these are
Yeah.
kids who very often will go
Selective.
to someone who is not appropriate
That's right.
as an attachment figure or just somebody to be around.
Yeah.
But if you know someone well
Mm.
that your child feels they can be their own selves with and try
Mm.
out what might be a trusting relationship, don't be afraid once you've vetted that person carefully. And of course, you're going to keep an eye on the relationship, but
Yeah.
don't be afraid to let the child try out what is it
Mm.
like to play, for example, with another person, with another adult, and not feel you have to keep that little hand up there saying, no, no, don't
Yeah.
get too close,
Yeah.
but actually try out what it feels like. Because what they're doing is trying to, just like with that analogy of the book, they're trying to learn English so they can read the book. They're trying
Yeah.
to learn what an attachment feels like. So then when they are ready, they can try it with a parent.
That's
So,
really comforting and hopeful to hear that.
oh,
I think
good.
you're right. I think that has been a strong messaging, um, particularly in the early years of attachment forming. So, if particularly
Mhm.
like if an older child is coming into your family unit, to be really protective of
Yeah,
almost like nesting, like we're going to just close ourselves in and just focus on our, and I
yeah,
get that in theory, but I do think that's a better that's a better frame to think about it from, that yes, as a primary, but not
yeah,
as an only. And that part of our primary care work for our kids is to create different spaces and places for safe connection.
yeah.
That's also our job. It's not
Right.
just us doing the work, it's us facilitating the work. So, can we find safe places? The vetting is a great example, right? That we screen
Yeah.
for that. We don't just say, oh, good, they have a new friend. We're just going to carry on with that. We're going to select and almost
Very
front
carefully.
load opportunities
Yeah.
for where we can trust that if it forms, it'll be a healthy formation. And that that's a safe place to experiment and play with and try on trust.
Yeah. Yep. And I
Yeah.
think, I was going through the book, my own book, even though it's almost 20 years old, it's a lot of it is still the same. Things have
Yeah.
not changed in terms of a lot of the attachment. But even then, 18 or 19 years ago, I was saying in the book, when your child first comes to you, you must be the primary caregiver. You must be the person with whom the child is connecting.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe on some level that that's correct. You do
Yeah.
still want to be the person that
Yeah.
child knows he or she can come to when they have an issue and that you will fill their needs. But in terms of feeling safe in just a play relationship, practicing that, trying that out. I was thinking of my own little granddaughter, who, of course, at today is 16 months old.
Aw.
And for her to come to me, whom she doesn't see very often, she
Yeah.
often looks at her mom or dad like, I'm not sure I remember. Is this person safe or not?
Yeah.
She's got a really healthy attachment going
Yeah.
with her parents. They're beautiful parents. They're doing an absolutely wonderful job.
Mm.
I couldn't be more proud of them and more happy for my granddaughter.
Mm.
But we pass attachment along to some
Mm-hmm.
extent. We share it with other people by saying, you trust me, I trust them. They're an
Yeah.
okay person.
Reciprocal.
Yeah. And it can also, I think what I'm saying is it can also go the other way.
Mm.
So there may be a
Mm.
grandparent or a neighbor or someone to whom we're very close, with whom this child just kind of has a natural affinity and it works.
Yeah.
Once that template is secure, once they say, oh, now I get it, the kids are saying, now I get it. I can actually let my guard down. I can actually just
Yeah.
have fun.
Yep.
That other person can help share it with parent, with mom or dad.
Yes. Yeah.
So it kind of goes both ways.
Okay.
I'm not taking away from the fact that mom and dad still have to be the
Yep.
primary
Are key.
attachment
Absolutely.
person. Yeah. Right.
Are there other things, approaches, or like steps? We always really try to be as concrete, even in complex topics, to help parents walk away feeling like I have a picture in my head now about something I can do today to shift the way I think about it, the way I talk to my child, the way I, from
Yeah.
that trauma informed lens, from an attachment based place. What are the key pieces? What are the things that we kind of have to hang our hat on and come back to over and over again as parents?
You know, I fell in love with Dan Siegel a long time ago when he
Yeah,
and I were both on in
me too.
1999 we both were in Washington D.C. as part of
Ah,
something the federal government was calling Safe from the Start. And we
okay.
were developing protocols for understanding how to help kids stay safe we were in the 5 and under area, and then there were other clinicians and
Okay.
theorists and whoever on in different ages. But I fell in love with him because of some of the things that he just talked about so naturally. Like, you have to fall in love with your kid. So I fell in love with
Right.
him because he talked about falling in love with kids. And I thought,
Yeah.
I don't know too many men who talk about that, not
Say
to be
that. That's
sexist,
right.
but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
he was the first one to introduce me to the whole GABA thing. And it's become something in my head that has really stuck with me. So um, when we talk about self regulation, big topic right now,
Yeah.
we need our kids to be self regulated. Yes, we do. We as parents need to be self regulated. We as clinicians
Mhm.
need to be, we all
Yeah.
hopefully need to be self
Yeah.
regulated. And we talk about it a lot recently.
Yeah.
Great. But how does that work?
Hmm.
So GABA is one of those neurotransmitters from our highest order thinking that actually we secrete and we squirt on on our basal brain, on our
Okay.
fear areas when they become activated. that say to us, hey, chill out. That's not really something that's going to hurt you. You see a stick in front of you when you're walking through the woods and you think, could that be a
Yeah.
snake? Oh my gosh, I'm scared. And of course, your body reacts like it's scared, as it should.
Yeah.
GABA then gets squirted as you realize, no, that's a stick, not a snake. And
Yeah.
your body can chill out. We can ease off the fight, flight, or freeze, however our body responds. But that doesn't work as well for infants. They get scared and then they kind of get stuck in being scared. And if
Yeah.
their bodies don't help them learn to chill, then they get what I call addicted to their own adrenaline. They get
Uh-huh.
stuck in
Yeah.
being hyperreactive.
Yeah.
So, somewhere along the line, it occurred to me that we as parents are the GABA
Hmm.
for kids until they can develop this themselves.
Right.
And let me give you an example. And I bet there are some parents who are listening who are going to chuckle about this because
Yeah.
lots of parents do it. I'm going to say more dads do it than moms. I'm going to say more moms go like
Yeah.
than
Yeah. Yeah.
than dads, but that's kind of sexist and not always the case.
Okay.
So dad has baby. Baby's now old enough to have enough structure that he or she can hold up their head and they're pretty well organized and their
I feel
muscles
it
are
coming,
working.
Lark. I feel it coming.
You know, you know what I'm going to
You're
say,
throwing
Karen.
that baby in the air.
Yes, and they throw that good for you. They
Oh,
throw that baby in the air. And when you look at the baby, and I've asked parents to do this before, and I
oh,
take pictures of the baby
oh my
up
goodness.
there, and they are in the middle of terror.
Yes.
And then dad catches them. And what does he do, Karen? What do they always
Mhm.
do? What do we always do? Bring them right here,
Yeah.
right?
Back
We bring
home.
them right to our heart.
Yeah.
And they listen to our heartbeat, and we take a breath and they take a breath, and we
Yeah.
chuckle and they giggle,
Yeah.
and then we do it again.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is teaching self-regulation
Mhm.
by practicing what I call other regulation. In other words, we're helping them learn what GABA does,
Yes.
what their own bodies will learn to do if they're lucky.
As
Lots of
soon as you
kids
said the word
don't know.
squirt, I was imagining sprinkler systems in a
Yeah,
building, and it doesn't take much smoke to make those go off. And so,
yep,
even if the fire is not that big, the sprinkler goes and it just settles our, yeah, it settles the fire before it gets
yep,
big, right?
yep,
And if
exactly.
babies don't have a sprinkler system installed, we do it for them. We sprinkle, we let them borrow from us,
Yep,
right? Until they go, okay, I'm developing that inside myself to be able to offer that to myself when I'm grown up. But that
that's
there's nothing
exactly right.
broken about a child if they don't have a sprinkler system. I think that's the other piece is they're meant to be dysregulated.
Yeah,
That's normal. We don't expect
right,
babies to self-regulate. And I think
right.
that's a lot of this parenting debate. How many books, I don't know if that was the 90s, that's just let your kid cry themselves to sleep. And then it shifted really pendulum swing to never let your child cry themselves to sleep. That's like torture, and you are making them suffer, and they need you, and you have to comfort and soothe. And parents went from, like, in one generation, they had to go, what? Am I abusing my child if I let them,
Yeah,
right? Such strong messaging because it happens so fast in reactivity to the other method of
yeah,
parenting. But I think that was one of those places at sleep time or bedtime that theory came out where
yeah.
parents were terrified of, like, have I damaged my older kids because I ascribed to that sleep schedule thing where I just let them scream it out until, right? That's, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And if you ask me the name of this book, I won't be able to tell you. So please don't ask. But
Yeah.
about 100 years ago now, the number one for book sold in the U.S. after the Bible was a book about how to raise your child, and it included this very pithy directive, which was, don't touch your children.
Oh,
Maybe
my
give
word.
them a kiss on their birthday.
Oh, don't
Seriously,
touch your children.
right?
Wow.
And that was the number one book uh, available to the public about 100 years ago.
Oh,
Well, talk about a pendulum swing, but it really depended, I think, on the culture, on where you came from. If that
yes.
was your habit,
Yes,
if that was
for
your
sure.
cultural inclination, if that was what you learned, remember, we live what we learn. If
Yeah.
that's what we learned, then that seemed like a natural thing. Like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
Right.
If it wasn't and you were fighting against it, like, I want to touch my kids. Half of my family is Italian.
Yeah.
We were always touched and hugged
Yes.
and kissed.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
I'll never forget that where we used
Uh-huh.
to, grandpa, great grandpa would,
Hmm.
just grab our cheeks and boy, it hurt. But
Yes.
for him, that was love. That was showing
Affection.
love.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the pendulum does swing in
Mm.
terms of what we think and how we think. But I think there are a couple things that I believe will not change, or maybe I should say, should not change. And that is number one, I would say, is that to help your child feel safe in their environment, meaning that their needs are being met.
Yeah.
And for me, their needs are being met with a smile, not a scowl, not to say, fine, you're
Resentfully.
hungry, here's your food,
Right. Right.
but rather, I'm so happy to be able to feed you,
Yeah.
now when it's
Yeah.
time to eat. That feeling of safety to me is the number one issue in helping kids
Mm.
develop in a healthy way. So, you
Mm.
know, when you ask about what's sort of the zeitgeist, or what's the way that
Yeah.
we can sort of frame this whole thing, if
Yeah.
you keep thinking of safety, we do that with physical safety. I'm not sure we think about it as much in emotional safety,
Agreed.
but it's
Yeah.
equally important,
Yeah.
I think.
We have to give more weight to that. I
I
also
think we
think
do.
it's a harder thing to relate because it's trickier to maybe dissect. So what our
Yeah.
child shows us might look like defiance or anger or withdrawn, and
Yeah.
we need translation skills, I think, for the emotional part, like for us to be able to say we know what's going on inside the child that makes that be seen to us is harder than
Mhm.
a child breaking their arm. It is what it is. We see it, it's a broken arm, we know what to do, we know what's needed, and we attend, right? And I think it's
Yeah.
just harder work to understand someone else's inner workings that might be veiled a little bit.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, the importance, I think, is it needs we need to elevate that and invest more in trying to understand and meet our kids' needs that way.
Oh, absolutely. And I wrote before our time today, Karen, thinking about what we were going to talk about. I
Yeah.
wrote quite a bit. And I went through parts of my book again, and I wrote down some things
Mm,
that I wanted to make sure came up. And actually, the example that I used in terms of understanding emotional safety was if our child came to us with a broken, I used back, but it could be arm,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
we can't see it from the outside.
Yeah.
But it's no wonder when we know it, it's no wonder that they either push us away if we try to get close because it's going to hurt,
Yeah.
or run away from us when
Yeah.
we go to hug them
Makes
because it's
sense.
going to hurt,
Mhm.
or um, that they just freeze in place and know that it's going to hurt and they just are going to deal with it. So
Yeah.
it's a fight, flight, or freeze response
Yeah.
to a physical injury that we may not be able to see, but their behavior should give us a clue that something is wrong.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing is true for emotional injuries, but it's not as obvious, is it?
Mm-hmm.
We
So
can't
watching, getting
see.
more attuned to see what the signs and signals are from our children when they are in self-preservation mode. How,
Yeah,
when they're protecting self, what does that look like for my child? How do I know when they
yeah.
feel they need to be protective of themselves? Because that's the cue to me then to understand, okay, they're feeling unsafe. It is less about what I'm seeing or what's coming at me. It's that's just data to tell me what's happening inside of them. And that
Behavior is
there's
a language, isn't it?
yes, it is.
Yeah. Behavior is a language, and sometimes it's the only language that kids have to
Yeah.
say. without words what they're feeling. So when I'll suggest to a family, I see that you're struggling, you may want to play a game together. Here are a couple that I would recommend. And the family calls me after 3 days and says, doesn't work. This kid won't engage. That's language. That's this child saying to you, I'm not ready for that. I'm not
Yeah.
safe in that environment yet.
Yeah.
Or you need to come at it a different way, or you need to be slower with it, or whatever it is that they're trying to say that they don't understand.
Yeah.
They don't understand it until earlier I mentioned that my best teachers in this whole life have
Yeah.
been parents and children with whom I have worked or whom I have come to know. Children tell me after maybe a year and a half or 2 years of therapy, attachment therapy is not fast. They'll say to me, when I would sit on the couch, on the sofa, when the family was saying, come on, you can play with us. Come on, don't be a party pooper. They had
Yeah.
no clue how scary that whole thing was to me.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize, they will say, how scary it was to me. I just knew I couldn't do it. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it. Not that I didn't want to or
Yeah.
didn't know how to. I
Yeah.
couldn't.
Couldn't.
Yeah. It's not willful,
No.
just like it's not willful on the part of a parent when they get so frustrated and they finally throw their hands up and say, I just
I'm
can't do this
lost.
right
Yeah,
now.
that's right.
That's not willful,
No.
but it's behavior
Yeah.
that will help us understand
Yeah.
what it is that they're feeling on the inside. It's a language. Behavior is a language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What helps we can get better at detecting, and then what do we do with it? So when we see the safety, the self-protection happen frequently, and we see the patterns, we see when this is happening, what do we actually do how do we adjust environments to make it more safe? What do kids need from us? Is it just validation? Do they need tenderness, compassion? What are the I think about kind of like the fairy dust. Like what are the ingredients in the fairy dust that kind of help the slow attachment movement towards security and safety?
I love that so much, Karen.
Hmm.
My favorite books when was growing up were Tarzan, because I think I needed to be king of the jungle or queen of the jungle or whatever. But the other was Peter Pan. And
Okay,
Tinkerbell
there you
and her
go.
fairy dust was just so close to my heart. Well,
Hmm.
we need to I'm going to suggest two things, and then of course there's a lot more in the book, and you're right
Yeah.
what you said at the beginning. We can't go into everything, but I'm going to suggest two things. One is that as much as we can, we need to understand the language and then do what the language is telling us to do. So, for
Okay.
example, if we have children who are pretty constantly pulling away, not wanting to be touched, let me give you a concrete example. For a while, it was very suggested in therapy, in attachment therapy, that we encourage kids to sit in their mom's lap, regardless of their age, put their heads back in their mom's arm or dad, attachment figure.
Yeah.
And the parent could then rock them or look into their eyes, maybe feed them a little, an animal cracker, whatever. But going back um, to the very earliest stages of attachment and helping that child feel safe in that environment. For some kids, that was brilliant. It worked really well. It was a lovely thing. And some kids you could see them melt into their parent's arm.
Mm.
Now, this may be a 14-year-old who yesterday
Yeah.
was telling their parent, sorry, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but F
Mm.
you, get
Yeah.
out of my face.
Yeah.
Don't even look at me.
Yeah.
Um, I can't stand to be in the same room with you. And
Yeah.
now we see them melting into their mom's arm. So
Yeah.
for some kids, that was great. For
Yeah.
many kids, it didn't work. And we
Yeah.
assumed, wrongly in most cases, that this was because the kids were not ready for that level of attachment or
Okay.
weren't able to participate in that way in an attachment activity. What we learned then was that somewhere between 75 and 90% of kids who have really rough beginnings and have not had the help along the way to deal with them. So that's the definition of trauma, right? Is not that
Yes.
you have tough stuff happening to
Right.
you,
It's that you're
but you have
alone.
tough stuff happening to you and you don't have the support to meet the need.
Yeah.
So the demand is greater than the need.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm saying that right. The demand is greater than the ability to meet that moment.
Right.
That's what I mean to say.
Yeah.
So
The overwhelm. Yeah.
you lose someone, you're hurt, you're afraid, whatever, and you don't have that person who's going to help you.
Yes.
So that is when trauma starts. Okay. So, of all the kids that we saw, somewhere between 75 and 90% of them is what the research is telling us now, have what we call sensory processing disorder.
Yeah.
Well, for many of those kids, simply the physical act of
Yeah.
lying backwards
Posture. Yeah.
is terrifying.
Yeah.
So we're encouraging them to do something that is anathema to them, that is frightening to them, that is physically makes them want to throw up or
Yeah.
not a good thing anyway.
Yeah.
And we're asking them to do it in the framework of attachment therapy. It was antithetical. And
I see
luckily,
that.
we
Yeah.
figured it out pretty quickly. So we have to be really careful about what our kids' language of behavior is telling us. Is it telling us that there is, as you suggested earlier, a broken arm?
Yeah.
And we're talking now about emotional breaks,
Hmm.
emotional pain. And if so, fine. But if not, is there something like a sensory processing disorder going on? And who do you go to? An occupational therapist. Make
Yep.
sure that it's somebody who knows what they're doing, who has specific training in early trauma with
Yep.
kids, pediatric OT.
Yeah.
So, so reading our kids is really important to understand how do we address this whole thing. The underlying issue here and the underlying point that I want to come back to is that there has to be a sense of safety, and that's the other part. And one way to help our kids be safe is also to prepare them for what's happening in their lives. So
Mm.
these are kids who don't generally do well with surprises.
Yes.
Prepare them when you're going somewhere. Tell them what's going to happen to the best of your ability.
Hmm.
Be with them until they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Maybe hook them up with someone else with whom they feel safe so that even if you can back up a little bit, they have another person who's with them who is a safe person. Maybe it's another kid who's at a party with them or something like that. So, reading your kids' language to say, what is it that's going on under the hood, so to
Yes.
speak?
That's right.
And secondly, preparing them as much as you can. Those two things are going to, they're going to go a long way to help kids trust you that as a parent, you can help them keep their life safe,
Yeah.
which is, of course, our main job as a parent is to keep our kids' lives safe until they're old
Yeah.
enough to do that for themselves.
Well, and what I'd like to add, if I can, here, and wondering what your thoughts are about this piece, because the amount of effort, stamina, patience,
Mm.
compassion,
Yep.
executive functioning, constant thinking, pre planning, being attuned and prepared, comforting, repairing, all of that stuff in relationship for a healthy developing child is already taxing for a new parent.
Yep.
When a child has had any kind of significant developmental trauma or neurowiring to cope with fearful circumstances, or has any kind of special needs, the the number, I just think of it, just shoots up. What's required of parents is so much. And so I think about part of the recipe has to be self care. And I don't mean the spa. I I mean regulation for us as parents who are in the mud of it all the time. We need showers more regularly, because if you just dabble in a puddle, you could just change your shoes and carry on. But if you are immersed in mud every day, you need a full cleanse, and that needs to match, right? You can't just do the little things that average parents do to be able to compensate for the level of need that your child needs from you. It's high. And I think people don't give themselves permission to recognize that.
And honestly, Karen, thank you for saying that, especially now during the pandemic,
Yes.
especially now.
Yeah. More of us are
It's
in the deep mud.
it's just a crusher out there for
Yeah.
everybody. And imagining that parents who have kids who are maybe neuroatypical
Yeah.
or sensory processing disorder. There are so many things that can go on with our kids that
Yeah.
the level of exhaustion and frustration, yeah,
It's
has
high.
to be so, so high.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're working on a program right now that is basically for caregivers, but they could also be teachers
Mm.
in terms of mm, self care. In a, it sounds like kind of a trite phrase,
I
doesn't it?
do. I hate
Because
the
you're
word.
right.
We need a better word
Yeah.
because it's not what I mean when I say it. I
No, I know.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
we can work on that, but
Yeah.
the idea is the same that we have to take care of ourselves and each other.
That's right.
I did want to mention today that parents should trust their guts. No one knows their kids better than they do, but
Thank you.
they also should
Yes.
not be afraid of couples therapy or parenting therapy
Get some help.
because it really can maybe be that place where you can just let it
Yeah.
rip and
Yeah.
just say what you're feeling and be in a safe zone.
The outlet.
So
Yeah,
find
that's
those
one
ways that
version.
you
That's
can
right.
help each other. Sorry,
I've
go
been
ahead.
suggesting to a lot of people to journal for the
Oh
first
yeah,
time
yeah,
because we're so isolated right now. We don't have, and
yeah,
therapy wait lists are huge. So we're now in that, like, when push comes to shove, we're getting real resourceful about finding different outlets. I know it's not going to cut it for a lot of people, but it's something. Um, Movement
yeah,
and the ability to express yourself somehow, do some art, find someone to talk to.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, there's got to be a place for that
yeah.
to go.
Yeah, and a parent said to me a long time ago, I started getting up 15 minutes earlier, just 15
Yeah,
minutes,
yeah.
and using that time. And I was interested. I thought she was going to say to journal. But what
Mm.
she said was to go lie down on the bed with my child because it's the only time I could feel relaxed when I was with him.
Oh,
And that was a
powerful.
very healing experience for her every morning to start the day with that
Yep.
ability to take a deep
Oh my
breath
goodness. Powerful. Yeah.
in physical proximity to
Yep.
her son,
Yeah.
who during the day was, on his best behavior in terms of giving her punches whenever he could see an opening.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how we can find those ways to give ourselves little
Yeah.
gifts during the day. And journaling is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
But we're working on this training for this. And there's going to be a lot more on our website, on my website, which is
Good.
larkeshleman.com, soon because we're revising a lot of what we're writing, what we're doing. I'm actually, as I'm getting closer to retirement, I'm really pinpointing now what is it that I want? What is the
Mm.
legacy that I want to leave? So even things like we were talking today about what can you do with your
Yeah.
family, very practically speaking. And I went
Yeah.
back to the book and said, oh, yeah, had a chapter about that. I kind of
Yeah.
forgot that. So
Yeah.
I put some of these examples down, like find a nickname
Huh.
only you can use with this child, but it's something
Oh,
positive about this
special.
child. So,
Nice.
um, I don't
Great
know,
suggestions.
sweet
Yeah.
eyes or whatever it is,
Yeah.
but you be the only one to use that nickname. And it's very
Oh,
special between the two of you, but it could mean something to this child, even if they don't get it right away.
yeah.
Or the fact of routines, which are so important for kids, so
Yeah.
necessary. But what happens when you have a shorter period of time?
Yeah.
you have to go to a meeting early, or you have a doctor's appointment, and so you don't have as much time in the morning to go through the 5 steps of your routine that you usually do. Don't don't take one of those steps out. Just
Mm.
shorten each one of them a little bit,
Okay.
because it's
They all
important to
matter.
keep
They're
the
all essential
routine.
ingredients. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, things like that, I am putting them now on little. Well, maybe I should talk to you about this, Karen. You're a wizard at figuring out how to get
Oh,
things out to
goodness.
parents, and I would very much like to have this available for parents. So
Yeah.
we're putting more practical kinds of things like that on the website.
Mm.
And I do want to mention that when you talk about how do you affect some of these things,
Yeah.
Jane Gordon is a friend who is an art therapist, and she and I developed a coloring book. We know from Bruce Perry's work and others' work that coloring can be very calming.
Yeah. I
It
love
must be
this.
there's some GABA in there
Uh-huh.
that
Sprinklers are
helps
going
kids to
off.
calm down when they
Yeah.
color. Well, we developed an extra wide coloring book that 2 people do together, and each one has their own part. And I won't go into detail, but it's called Color Me Closer.
Yeah.
And there are few enough specific games, activities, things that you can get your hands on to do with kids, that this was the first of what we were developing. And I'm so excited about it because we're getting very positive results from people. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
this child who didn't want to sit next to me now is crossing over my arm to
That's
color on
great.
my side of the page. And
Yeah.
we're laughing about it.
Oh,
Those kinds of experiences give me
warming.
more joy than I can tell you.
Seriously. Oh,
So I encourage people to look on the website and see what's there. And then, of course, I also thrill at other parents, therapists, other people who have a lot to offer,
yeah.
who share that. And, it takes time, but the more we can take a deep breath and spend a couple minutes thinking of one thing, finding one activity, seeing one encouraging remark that feeds us,
Yes.
because our kids often do not,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's
I
hard.
recently had a great kind of problem solving conversation with a parent who was hungry. She's like, by the end of this session, I want to walk away with a concrete thing I can do to connect and feel good at the same time as my child. So when you were sharing that story about getting up 15 minutes earlier, because that was the only time that we found that
Yeah.
worked for us to be on the same page. And we were both being fed from that experience. So we had this dialogue and we hummed and hawed and thought through batted around all sorts of ideas. And then we realized what's relatively new in the last 15, 20 years are cooperative games.
Yeah.
So, board games that don't pit you against each other,
Right.
but allow you to both celebrate a win because together you teamed up and you got the same outcome. And for kids who are easily dysregulated and also feel like they rarely have control in life, competition and winning matters a whole lot. And it just sets people up. You think, well, I'm just playing a game with them that should be fun. 9 out of 10 times it ends in a fight or them storming off or a miserable evening. And she's like, oh, games never work for us. And then we got to this place where we thought, well, what would it look like if it was a cooperative game? They have played that child obsessively asks to play that game now, like every day. Can we play that again? Can we do it while we eat dinner? Can we play it before bed? Can we do it? And both of them have experienced laughter peppered through the day because these games only take 15-20 minutes, so it's great. We'll just play one round, but we'll
Yeah.
do it 3 times a day. She's like, I don't even care that we're doing the same thing over and over
Yeah.
because we do it well. And I get to claim that 15-minute window as we got along. We got to high five each other. We were like bonding over snacks at the same time. And it was just an
Yeah.
avenue that worked for both at the same time. So cool to see. So cool
Yeah.
to see.
There is a very beautiful piece of research that suggests that early childhood games are the very best, even not non-cooperative, I
Yeah.
mean, non-competitive rather, board games or anything like that. But things like peekaboo,
Yeah.
even with a 14-year-old, I was shocked. that they
Huh.
wanted to participate in these games. But
Yeah.
when we had trouble with a child in the waiting room who didn't want to come into a therapy session, and God knows I understand why they didn't want to come
Yes.
in.
Right.
We were
Right.
going to be picking at stuff that doesn't feel good.
Mhm.
I would go out and say, and not even tell them what I was doing, but take their hands and start to play Ring Around the Rosie and just gently pull them up and around
Yeah.
in the direction of the therapy room.
Yeah.
And then when we all fall down, it's we all sit down and we
Yeah.
help them sit down in the chair in the therapy room.
Yeah.
You know how surprising it was, shocking really to me, that even teenagers were willing to participate. And they might give me a dirty look when we
Yeah,
start out,
sure.
but
But
by
you
the
can
end,
see
they're
they have a
usually
smile.
chuckling. Yeah.
That's right.
And
I know.
well, they thought I was nuts.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I am.
That's part of
So
the
it
charm.
did it
That's
bug.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a way to say to them, among other things, I know you missed this when you were a kid. You
Yeah.
couldn't really enjoy it
Yeah.
then, but let's just be silly about it now.
Yeah.
And I'm not a threatening person. They
Yeah.
don't have to attach to me.
Yeah.
But when they became more comfortable with it, then we'd grab mom and the three of us would
Yeah.
go in, or we might do a balloon, hit the balloon back and forth to each other down the hall.
Yeah.
You keep
It's the
moving, you're going in the
transition.
direction you want.
Yes.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
have suggested that to parents too. That the old my kids will never come to dinner.
Uh-huh.
I call them and yell at them, and they're not.
Yeah.
I know they're ready for dinner, but they won't come. You ring around the rosy with them. They'll think you're nuts. Who
Yeah.
cares?
Uh-huh.
They'll remember somewhere in their body. They'll remember that. But remembering
It's
that
regulating.
it is
Yeah.
regulating, and it's early childhood games all come from neurology.
Yes.
Peekaboo is object permanence.
Yeah. Serve and
Um,
return.
Ring Around the Rosie is rhythm, which is so important.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's just you see them
Yeah.
around the world in one form or another.
Yeah.
So going back to early childhood, neurologically regulating
Mhm.
experiences with them is really good for
Yeah.
everybody. And
Yeah.
usually end up laughing, even if it's at each other. Who cares?
That's right.
It's just a good thing.
Totally. You've named a lot of supports and a lot of resources. I'm going
Yeah.
to make the show notes for this episode really long and thick. I'm
Uh
going to
huh.
plug in as much as I can. Um, Before we end today, do you have anything that you're dying to just put out on the table? Anything you want to say, either on any topic we've talked about or a resource that you really want people to know about?
The thing that I would like to say to parents the most is, one of the hardest things in parenting is putting our own egos aside.
Yeah.
It's definitely whether
Yeah,
these
that's
kids,
work.
it is work, and it's very scary because we build our own self image um, about how we view ourselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to move that over and
Yeah.
say, for this job, I can't use that.
Yeah.
For example, I am hyper organized on the outside because I'm very disorganized on the inside. And
Mm.
I take pride in the fact that I organize around myself
Yeah.
because I'm afraid I'll forget or mess up inside. Well, there were times when my kids were young that I had to say, forget it. If
Mm.
I can't, it's just not as important to be organized right now as it is to get down on the floor and
To be
play in the
present.
sandbox with the kids. Or
Yeah.
I used a rice box, because
Yeah.
rice was easier to sweep up. But when they
Yes.
were really having a ball in there with rice and they said, Mom, come on, Mommy, come on, play.
Yeah.
Sometimes I had to say, all right, this place is going to look like a mess right now. I
And that's
don't care.
okay. Yeah.
It's more important. And it's a very hard thing
Mm.
to do. So we have to
Yeah.
sometimes put our own ego aside and
Yeah.
just do what we, in our hearts or our gut, know our children need
Is
at
the
that
right
moment.
thing. Yeah. Yeah. It's permission. Permission to pivot, permission to be
Yeah.
present. And I think the permission is required because there are so many external demands on us. There's cultural norms set for
Yeah.
us. There are societal pieces. There are messages that we've received from our parents about what makes you a good parent.
Oh, yeah.
And if we're not adding up, right? And so if I can't get my kid to do this the way I want, then that's going to show up when they go to
Yeah.
school and they don't do those things. And that's embarrassing for me. And we have to be conscious parents, right? To really decide for ourselves with what we know now about parenting, with what we have learned for ourselves, to trust ourselves and give ourselves permission to make
Yeah.
new rules for this. That we don't have to have a spotless home. We have to have a lived in home where life happens, particularly when we're in our homes way more than we ever thought we would be. This becomes all the space for all the people. And we need permission to both find solace and organization, but also chaos and paint on the walls. Like,
Yeah.
I know that's extreme, but like there's we can't think the way we used to because it's different times, it's a different generation, it's we know different things. I just would love parents to just pause their assumptions and ask themselves, why do I feel like this is that important?
Yeah.
Does it have to be this way? And
Yeah.
what is my gut telling me? So I
Yeah.
really love that you ended us on that note, permission and trust your gut. Parents have such strong, wise just intuition. Yeah.
Yeah. Very much. My heart goes out to everyone who's listening. And I hope that we can at some point connect. But you know what? At this moment, I hope that we're connecting through our hearts.
Yeah.
Karen,
Yeah.
I feel so blessed that you have given me this opportunity to talk with you. You're so brilliant in what you do, and to just back and forth with you about this, what a gift. Thank you.
Ah, I am feeling that same joy you entered this conversation with. I walked in with it too. It was so good to be with you today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We'll continue. I'd love to keep working with you on some stuff and get the right tools to the right people.
It'd be
So we'll
awesome.
be in touch for sure. Have a
Okay.
great rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.